screen for the agenda.
Well, I think this is like your first rodeo of hosting, I think. So we've got backup for you, Superintendent. Before we get going though, I've got to do some opening business, which first thing will be a roll call. Okay. So welcome to our USDB meeting all. And I'm going to do a roll call for our board members. Vice Chair Belknap.
Here.
Member Booth.
He'll be late.
Okay. Member Cannon.
I see her here.
Yeah. Member Klein.
Here.
Vice Chair Davis, I think
She's going to be in and out, Chair.
in and out. Member Earl. I'm not seeing her logged in yet. Member Hanson.
Yes, hello.
Morning or good afternoon. Member Hart.
Here.
Member Hutchings.
I'm here.
Member Hymas.
Here.
Member Lear.
She's logging in right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Member Moss.
Here.
Member Norton.
Yes.
Member Straight.
Yes.
Okay, welcome. We do have a quorum. I've got the statement I've got to read. As authorized by Utah Code 52-4, this meeting is being held electronically without an anchor location for safety reasons due to the construction at the location where the public body would normally meet. Okay, we got through that. First item on here, and Superintendent Coleman, you're sharing screen.
I'm not able to. It looks like my screen sharing is disabled.
Okay. So while we're
I
working,
believe you a co-host. Let's just double check. Jerry.
You can share your screen now.
Thank you very much. Okay. Is that what we wanted, was for me to just have the agenda up there and I can click on each item?
yes,
Okay.
I'm gonna get my participants up.
Superintendent Coleman, are you able to make that screen larger by chance?
It's opened all the way.
Maybe after he pulls up his item, then he could enlarge it.
Try Control Plus.
Okay, well, the first item while we're getting into this is public comment. We don't have anyone signed up, but Superintendent Coleman, you're going to cover a piece of this on the public comment side.
Yeah, part of the public comment period today fulfills the requirement that we allow the public to comment on two of the items that you will be approving as a board. One of them, and they're both related to the student fee schedule. One of them is the actual fee schedule. The other is the policy for student fees.
So it's the fees itself and the policy.
Yeah, we've received no comments via email. We've sent notice out to all of our parents and the public, and we've received no policy comments either. A lot of that, I think, has to do with this really doesn't represent any change. It's more of a compliance matter that we open this to the public before the board approves it.
Policy, procedure, and compliance. So with that being said, we don't have any public comment. Let's move to our next item, which is the student fee schedule. Superintendent Coleman, and this is an actionable item.
Thank you. I hope you can see this. Can you see that on your screens?
Yes.
There you go. This is the student fee schedule that you'll be adopting today by motion. And these fees, there are really only three fees. The fourth item in that table is the maximum annual fee limit for any student. Each year, we don't anticipate anyone actually meeting that limit. We set it high enough so that they shouldn't, but Only the sports fee, the driver's education fee, which is required by law, or we wouldn't charge it at all, and the study abroad fee.
Okay. This isn't really it's unlike some of the LEAs that have multiple fees and quite a bit of work on it. But again, this is a policy and procedure and compliance item. Is there any questions from the board, or is there a motion from the board? Member Earl? Your hand is raised.
Yes, sorry. I don't know why my video's not coming on. So apologize for that.
You're fine.
I did have a question. It has to do with the maximum amount. And then just, I guess I'd wondered, is it because maybe people or students actually play more than one sport, or do you know what I mean? I'm just wondering why the maximum amount was set at 1,000. Not that we want to go more than that, but I just was wondering what that could possibly add up to equal 1,000 for our students.
We set that pretty low compared to most schools, just to minimize the out-of-pocket expense for any family. It is required in the law that we have a maximum fee. So we thought by setting it there,
Okay.
that would prevent them from having any undue hardships. And by the way,
Okay,
all
I
these fees
just-
are subject to fee waiver as well.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Member Norton?
And I think you just answered my question. These are all fee waivable if the student or the family meets the requirements. Is that correct?
Yes, and all of that information with links is provided right underneath the fee schedule itself too. This was also vetted very thoroughly back and forth with staff at USBE after they did a fee audit for us.
Member Hanson? You're muted.
There we go. Sorry, I clicked
Yep.
too many times. Had it go off and on. I just had a question about the overall philosophy for fees at USDB, because this schedule does look very different from the ones that we see from other LEAs. I understand that all the fees would be waivable with application, but we've chosen not to charge, it looks like, a lot of fees that would show up on other schools' fee schedules. Can you just talk to us, Joel, for a minute about the philosophy there?
Yes, that's a really great question. Thank you. Our philosophy is to actually, if we could get away with it, we would actually charge no fees at all, which was the case with the driver ed fee. But we have enrichment funds that are more than able to offset almost all student fees that would otherwise be charged at other schools. And so we just thought there was no reason to pass those on to parents if not necessary. So aside from driver's ed, which is a legal requirement, the sports fee requires them to do that because what we found is in the past when they don't actually pay a fee, we have kids that come in and out, and we've actually had to pay more in fees to UHSAA for forfeiting or dropping out of a sport completely mid-season. And so when the families pay this fee, they are engaged and they're committed, and that way the rest of the team doesn't suffer when a couple of students drop out, because we usually don't have very many additional students. We barely make the thresholds for sports as it is. The study abroad fee, of course, is because we put thousands of dollars into that for students, and this allows us to book a trip and pay for the upfront airfare, and then this fee is actually returned to the student when they leave on the trip, so that they have that money and it's part of their learning experience to go exchange money and to learn how to purchase things and to provide for their own needs while they're on the trip. So that comes back to the families.
You have a
I
follow-up?
appreciate that. So my understanding is that USDB's general philosophy is not to have any additional expenses for the families of these kids. We're charging just the bare minimum that we think is necessary to lock kids in and encourage commitment and abide by the law. Is that right, Joel?
Yes, you stated it even better than I did. It's as little as possible, just the bare minimum.
Thank you.
Okay. Vice Chair Belknap,
Yes, I'd like to make a motion, Chair,
okay,
that we approve USDB's fee schedule.
Second.
we have a motion second. The motion for the board is that the board approve USDB student fee schedule. Discussion to the motion. Did you want to speak to the motion?
No, thank you.
Discussion to the motion. I'm not seeing any hands raised. We'll vote on this. The motion before the board is that the board approve the USDB student fee schedule. Board members at this time, please vote. Voting is complete.
I didn't see Board Member Earl, Chair.
Board Member Earl? Are you with us?
Okay,
Okay, voting is complete, voting is unanimous. Okay. Next, we'll move to item 5.3. Utah Schools for the Deaf and the Blind Building Projects. You want to give some background on this, Superintendent?
Yes, thank you. This has been weighing the heaviest on my mind lately. Here's the slide deck. I hope you can each see that. We are here today because with this item, we are here today. That sounds funny, like I'm starting some big thing. The reason this item is on your agenda today is because as you recall, during the legislative session, two of our requests were one-time requests for two different buildings, one in St. George and one adjacent to our Salt Lake campus. And the money was appropriated with some intent language from the legislature. And here's exactly what they wrote, just for your to help you remember. The legislature intends that the State Board of Education, in consultation with the Division of Facilities and Construction Management, evaluate the provision of capital facilities for USDB in southwestern Utah and Salt Lake County to address the following items: student academic needs of direct instruction and support services, efficiency of use, and maximizing student capacity, impact of delivering services to students in each region, cost effectiveness, and priority of construction. So those are the things I'll be discussing during this item. And then after this, the State Board of Education will report the findings to the Executive Appropriations Committee. So Chair Huntsman and I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce Matt Boyer, who is with us today from the Division of Construction Facilities Management. Matt, are you on this call? He is supposed to. Well, anyway, he will be there with us with the legislature when we go, and he said he would try to join this meeting as well. Matt is the Assistant Director of Bfcm, and we've been working very closely with them over the last month to prepare this information, because clearly the legislature wanted to be supportive and appropriated the money, but they wanted a few more details on why these are necessary facilities. And so that's the first slide. And then after we report to them, but by the way, the date was October 1st, but we will be reporting on May 17th in the next Executive Appropriations Committee, so that these projects can get underway starting July 1st with programming and design when the new fiscal year starts. So that's the context of what we're doing here. The next slide is one that a lot of these you'll recognize, and I won't spend lots of time on them with you, but some I will go a little deeper to help with the deeper understanding that we'll be presenting. This is the slide that I showed throughout the state. This is what we see from our unique vantage point as USDB. And the two items in bold are where these two buildings will go. Wasatch Front has been steady growth, but the need for our high school building for the deaf here was brought about, in addition to the growth, also by the needs of our high school students who for many years were not thriving because we had farmed them out to the local schools in this area. where they were taught there, but the programs were not optimized for them, and they were really not doing well academically. So we pulled them back to our campus here in Salt Lake for their core classes with teachers of the deaf, and they are doing amazingly better. We still actually transport them to the local high school or middle school here for the secondary kids for specialized classes like auto shop or other things with an interpreter. But for their core academic learning, they are doing much better being here in an environment where everyone can communicate with them directly. So they kind of have the best of both worlds now. Problem is, this campus was not built for the high school kids, the secondary kids. And so that's why we're looking at the building here. And if you also recall, last year, the legislature appropriated money for us to purchase an adjacent property, which we did this year. The second one, of course, is in Washington County, St. George, and we'll go through the needs there. The buildings are needed for two different reasons, two different regions, but I think we'll get into the details and help you understand that. This timeline was developed for an overview of what has happened since the state board appointed me as the superintendent 9 years ago. This has been what we've done to improve and remedy the challenges we've had to facilities all around the state, including our existing facilities. And this is just meant to show down the two of the last three items are these two properties. The others have all been upgraded or improved or constructed, and they really are serving our needs well. So we've been grateful for the support we received over the years from the legislature. During the course of the legislative session, here's a sample of some of the questions we received when we brought this to them. One of them was, why is the per cost student so high to build USDB facilities? We will address that in a minute when I get to the slides that came from Bfcm. They inserted data right into this presentation straight from them, because if you remember, the legislative intent language asked us to, state board, to collaborate with Bfcm to determine all of those factors. Second question, how many students will be in each new building? And we've submitted those numbers, and we have them for you too today to discuss as we get into this a little more. Part of the challenge with that question is students in the building is one way to measure things, but with Division I schools, which are small rural schools normally, and with USDB, with students who have disabilities, you might still need a classroom even if you don't have a lot of students in a grade level. So where the high school or my own children go to school, they have like 35 students in a classroom. Well, we might only have 35 students in 4 or 5 grade levels, but obviously you can't have them all in one room that way. And so we balance that information with what the students' actual needs are, because they need a classroom whether they have a big class or a small class. Another bullet point or a question that we were asked during the session is, why don't districts contribute to USDB? And as you know, we've had a lot of discussions recently with the 3% rule, and districts actually do pay for USDB if they're above the 3% rule for USDB services. But when kids come here to our buildings, the setup long before my time has been that USDB pays for its own teachers and classrooms and facilities. The next bullet point I'm hearing a lot more lately. Shouldn't USDB students be educated with their disabled peers in their neighborhood schools? And people who know a little bit about IDEA and special education law, the state laws as well, understand that there's a concept called the least restrictive environment. And that is where generally you've seen a move for students who will benefit this way to being included with their non-disabled peers. However, an individualized education program, an IEP, actually requires it to be individualized. And for all students, that's not the same. So on our campuses, for example, you'll notice a pattern here. Most of the kids on our campuses are deaf students using both LSL and ASL. Very few of the kids on our campuses are the blind students, except for in preschool years. Once they become school age, most of them are with their non-disabled peers. Deaf students are the same if they're using LSL, but if they use ASL, the opposite is true. It's a much more restrictive environment to send them with their peers who can hear, because they can't communicate and they're deeply isolated and they experience tremendous trauma and social emotional challenges that way. When they come to a campus where their teachers, their advisors, their counselors, and all of their peers can sign and communicate with them, they don't even experience that at their home over 90% of the time. And so it's just a much better environment for them. And so that's a little bit of the answer to why shouldn't all of our students be with their regular peers in their regular schools? Not necessarily. It depends on the child. Next question. Do the local school district superintendents and special ed directors support these building requests? Yes, they do. And of course, between Washington County and Salt Lake County, where we have many school districts in each, I've had discussions with all of them this week in anticipation of our meeting and then our coming up meeting with the Executive Appropriations Committee. I reached out to them again and said, is it okay if I represent you, that you're supportive of what we're doing here? And every single one of them that responded said absolutely 100%. And one of the best parts of my job is being able to interact with my superintendent colleagues and help them see how we are a support to them and how we fit in, and we can help them meet these kids with what we call low incidence disabilities that they may or may not be able to serve. Next question we hear is this concept of double dipping. Are districts double dipping when they get outreach services from USDB? That is sort of a misconception. They really don't. When a student's in their district we send a teacher to them, we only send them here and there whenever the IEP asks for it. They're still providing all the other services, the classroom, teachers, other specialists, lunch, transportation, all that stuff. And so outreach students are mostly funded by their local districts, and we just come in a little bit here and there with related services. Why does USDB lose space in some district classrooms? This is why we started our building program 9 years ago, because what we found is that each year when the law used to require that districts provide space for USDB students, but there was no enforcement mechanism. And when push came to shove, the districts that were growing and needed the space themselves would say, sorry, we've got to have our portable back. And all of these students were in portable units with a couple in school classrooms. And so that's why we started acquiring our own, so that when we were there, we wouldn't have to worry about next year, do we have to send a student back to their school when we might be a better placement for them? And that's why we need to own our own facilities. And then the last question that I put on this list, there may be more, but these are the most frequent ones we've heard lately. Why do ASL students sometimes return to USDB classrooms? And that's because quite often their parents will place them back in their local district, which is their choice, but the student doesn't thrive and they want that language-rich environment. And so like I described before with sign language, they come back and if for that child that works best, it's great. It's not the same for all of them. Do you have any other questions before I leave the slide on questions?
I'm not seeing any hands raised, but I'm sure there'll be some questions towards the end of the presentation.
Okay.
Let's continue.
Great. So just as a simple overview, the way we approach this is very consistent with the items that the legislature asked us to review with their intent language. Our guiding principles on how we make decisions about buildings and distributing resources is, number one, what's our core mission and our fiduciary duty? How do we serve students effectively? And how do we try to come up with solutions to serve the students that are not currently being served effectively? That's what drives a lot of these requests. And then the second item to that is how do we do it in a cost-effective manner? And that includes two sub ideas there, which are, number one, how do we have cost savings when we're building a building? And number two, how do we avoid some of the costs we're incurring now that maybe not be used effectively? And that's a good example of that is, for example, in the southern Utah area, which we're building the St. George building, but that'll serve all of Washington County and Iron County, and maybe even into Beaver County, very effectively on the southwest part of the state where most of that population is. We are currently we spend over $100,000 a year just taking our professionals from that live on the Wasatch Front and driving them down there to meet with kids here and there, when the kids actually need more time, and it's not as effective as it would be if they were meeting with them 2 or 3 times a week or even daily, like the kids on the Wasatch Front can. We understand that we can't possibly do that for every student in the state. Where there are kids in rural areas that are way out there and isolated, we're not going to be able to have personnel dedicated to those areas. But Washington and Iron counties are growing fast enough with a significant population now that it really does make sense to have a centralized location in that area. The next 3 slides came from DFCM, and I will cover them unless Matt is on the call. It doesn't look like he is. So this came from them, and this goes to the concept of cost effectiveness. First thing, we met with the director, Jim Russell, and assistant director, Matthew Boyer, and they said this is what they're sharing with everyone. And just for context, these are the numbers in the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 years. 61% cost escalation. I know that doesn't surprise any of you because it's in the news everywhere, and people are talking about it at the water cooler and at church and in the neighborhoods and everywhere else you go. And so they said this sets the stage for what's actually happened, but the numbers are actually good for us. So on USDB projects, the good news is we've had experience now building 2 significant buildings, much larger than the 2 that we're about to build. And so he did the cost comparisons. Now, I actually think I skipped one slide, but it showed how we got to these square foot numbers. These are equivalent numbers in today's numbers. They were not. So for example, on the left, our 2 completed buildings, the Openshaw Center and the Springville School, were not 458 and 555 in raw numbers in 2015 and 2019. But in today's adjusted for inflation numbers, which is what DFCM is using with the legislature, so it's apples to apples, they said that would be the equivalent today of 458 and 555. And I got the numbers wrong on the right side over here. Where it says new buildings, Salt Lake and St. George School, those should both say 475. And down at the bottom, that I'll repair that before we go to the legislature, of course, I'll fix that slide. But on the bottom, you can see the line of the Openshaw building on the left, which was the least expensive building we built, and the Springville building on the right. And the average would be around 506. The 2 new projects that we're bringing in now, they are being priced by DFCM at 475. So we're all actually less than the average of what we build our other buildings for in numbers adjusted for today's inflation. And the reason is because part of it, well, let me go to this next. I'm going to skip there. Our architects actually made something for us called a complexity list as they scoured the country for architecture and for what's needed to teach deaf and blind students. The left column here is all the specialty things you would not normally put in a building, but you do for deaf education. And on the right, same for the blind. And then, and we won't go through every one of these, but you can see it's a very extensive list. And we generated this originally under Governor Herbert's administration when they asked, what is the difference in these buildings? And then there's another slide here with just for the clinical resources that we're required to provide that most schools are not. And for the life skills underneath that, those are the things that were added to that. And this next slide is what our architects use at a presentation they gave in Las Vegas, because they have become the experts, the go-to people in the country. In fact, they just bid it on a big $300 million project in Indiana because of what they have done here, and people have realized these are effective. Having said all of this, and you'll notice a lot of these things are the things that were on the other 2 slides there. We're not even putting all these things into the building. One nice thing about our experience is that we have we've decided what things were nice but not necessary, and we're just including things that are necessary now. So that's one way we were able to keep the cost down to the square footage that's less than the average of what we built previously. I now have a set of slides for each
We have a,
project.
hang on one sec, will you?
Yes.
And it might be on one of your previous slides here. Remember straight, hand is raised.
Yes, thank you. I took a tour of, I've been on both the Ogden campus and the Salt Lake campus and taken tours, and some of the design features, amazing. Lots of detail to create the best environment for these students. So I've seen it firsthand. If you haven't seen it, go visit.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Continue on, Superintendent.
Okay, the remaining slides are in two groups. The first, we'll just talk about the Salt Lake project in particular, and then we'll move to the St. George project so that you can have any of your questions answered there. Salt Lake High School. This is a map of our current campus is outlined in red. You can see at the top is the large building, the Openshaw Center we just built. To the right side, it looks like parking lot. It's dark, but that's actually the rooftop of the older school that's in front, the JMS building. And then the part that's highlighted in yellow is the site that we purchased last year with money that the legislature gave us so that we could build this building. Zooming in there, you can see there's currently a little house and a garage behind it. The nice thing about this property is it's shielded from the rest of the neighborhood. With the exception of the tiny house right across the street from it, the other houses will have very, very little impact on them. And so we are hopeful that that'll be good for the neighbors. Currently, I'm just going to show you a series of pictures. As you can see here, I just walked into one of our classes. It's not just classroom space that we need, but it is office and clinical space. We have about 6 of our classrooms at the JMS school that are divided up like you see this one here. You see in the back of the room, there are these dividers that are set up. That's because on the other side of the dividers, the classroom closet there and the space between the closet and the dividers is used for a therapy room. We have occupational, clinical therapists, speech therapists, of course, a lot of speech therapists with our deaf school. And so these classrooms are all L-shaped now because we've carved out office space. That's one of the main purposes in addition to classrooms for the Salt Lake campus. Here's another classroom with a similar setup, and you can see how that just impacts the class. This is on the other side of the dividers where they use the closet here for therapy work with the kids, and then the office space is right out here. We've also taken the old gym in the JMS building and renovated it this way and built this wall that you can see with the basketball hoop on it with storage behind it. Even though we still need this as a gym, this week we're getting a divider delivered here so we can divide this room in half, and behind the pads in the middle at each end we have a TV. So the classroom furniture is set up it's stored in those closets, and then we pull it out. We can pull it out and set it up for classes and use this for temporary classrooms, and then put it away when the kids need to come in and have PE time. Oops, wrong direction. We've also, for our high school kids, we're using these little conference rooms instead of classrooms. These conference rooms are intended for parents when they come in for IEP meetings or for small staff meetings, but we're using them as learning space for the kids because now that we have those high school kids on our campus, they don't have learning space. And we've gotten kind of creative too. This open area here, this is a high school class that we have. This area was built as itinerant space for our outreach teachers. They each have lockers and they come in here and just grab whatever area they can for their computer work, and then they go out and drive in our fleet cars to meet the kids in the other district schools. But we also use this now. We're using this for teaching kids like this. They don't really have optimal desks, but it's at least a place for them. We meet on the stage. Here's another little conference room over at our JMS school. And this is the little house that we recently purchased. We've made it ADA accessible. We have also trimmed the grass that was growing through the ramp, but it's only this entrance that's ADA accessible. The rest of the school building is not. And so we have students like this student here who have equipment that won't work. Inside the house, we have the kids sitting in this configuration, and the stairway that go down, there's 2 rooms like this that we use for class space. And then downstairs, there's a very low ceiling and a skinny stairway. That's part of it that's not ADA accessible. And so, but we still plan to just use this for at least a couple extra classrooms until we can get the new building built. So we brought our own furniture in, and this is kind of how they learn. It's not like having a classroom, but it's, I guess, better than nothing. This is the slide that we brought to the legislature that they approved, and it has kind of a breakdown. We're hoping the Salt Lake High School building will have 8 to 9 classrooms and 8 offices, bathrooms, some group spaces, just something so high school kids have their own school and they're not tucked into the, you know, the corners of the elementary school anymore. And then I made a list for the legislature as part of this slide deck for key items to consider. And that is the things that I already explained to you pretty much there. So let's see, do you have any questions on the Salt Lake High School building? It will mostly serve deaf students. We don't need any more capacity for the blind school at this time in Salt Lake County.
So, well, I've got a question. I didn't raise my hand on that. So the proposed school in Salt Lake, will it, as it's being designed and working with the Bfcm and the architects and that, will it be ready to receive blind students, or is it going to have limitations or just be specifically designed for the deaf?
It's
have accommodations, I guess, is a question.
If we ever needed it, we could use it for blind also, but we don't anticipate that need coming up.
Okay.
When you get into secondary school, we have what we do with the blind students in the state. They really do need to be with their non-disabled peers in their traditional schools. And we bring them in for, Susan Patton's doing an amazing job, Associate Superintendent Patton. She's bringing them in for academies. They're starting to do things where we bring them in short time and then take them back, and we really collaborate closely with the schools that way. And most of those will be going to our Ogden campus, and we'll be transporting them there for that. So we don't see the need here in Salt Lake County for more blind space.
Thank you. Please continue.
Okay, the St. George building, very different, but from what we just discussed. But here's an aerial view of the land. Has been actually, the land has been given to us by Washington School District. They're not just supportive, they're super supportive. And you can see that it's right in the middle of a complex of several schools that they already have. At the bottom part of the picture is the Desert Hills High School campus. Right next to that is, in box number 2, is the Desert Hills Middle School. And above that, across the intersection at the very top, box number 3 is Bloomington Hills Elementary School, which is the site where we're going to be located. Beneath that, they have the Bloomington Hills Preschool. They have their own district preschool there, which is a small building. And then that whole corner lot that's in yellow, number 5, is the land that they've given us to build a USDB facility there. And this is just an ideal location for that reason, and because it's very well located for the whole population of the county as well. A little bit closer here, you can see the land on the side where we are near the elementary and preschool. And this is what the land looks like from there. Board member Norton met me and Carl Empey there, and we walked around a lot and looked at it. And this is the building right next door, the preschool. We anticipate building a building similar to this. One of the things Washington County does to save money is they build these schools out of tilt-up concrete, and it's very good in the hot weather that they have. And it's also very cost effective. They claim to save 20 to 25% over traditional school buildings throughout the rest of the state. And this is a picture of the elementary school. You can see how it's built the same way, but they can add some relief. It's not just a concrete slab. So I think it'll look good and also be very cost effective. They have given us a classroom inside that elementary school building we've been using this year. And when the portable is finished, which will be in June, we'll be out of there, and because they really needed that space too. It's growing so fast. This is a picture of the current classroom. We have 4 classes in St. George. We need many more, but we only have 4 because it's all the space we can get. And they're in 2 classrooms. We have 2 schools lending us classrooms right now, this one and another school called Arrowhead. And so we have 2 of our teachers with both of their classes in each classroom. And normally we have our teachers keep their rooms very visually uncluttered, but that's a luxury we can't have. And I took this picture so you can see our great teachers, but also you can see how they just have things stacked. We don't have any storage there. And so it's all in the classroom with the kids now. These are pictures of these little guys, and one teacher here is ASL and one is LSL. And these were awesome little kids when we were in there. It was just so fun to see them. This is the interior of the portable, which is actually finished now. The interior is, the drywall is finished and it's being painted currently. So we're on track for a June opening. And this is the slide that we used for the legislature to show them the numbers. This will be a little bit bigger. It'll be 10 to 12 classrooms instead of 8 to 9 like our Salt Lake building. But this will be much more than just a deaf high school. In fact, our high school kids in this area, our middle and high school, will come for core classes, but then go back to, they will interact with the high school adjacent and their new tech high school. They have special space for us there too. So this is really going to be the whole headquarters for our Salt Lake or our Southern Utah operations, which include our PIP advisors who are currently, and our outreach teachers who are all working out of their cars. They don't have any USDB facility down there like we do in Salt Lake and Ogden and Springville. So instead of working out of their cars full time, they'll have office space. We will have preschool classrooms. We will have elementary classrooms. And then we have part-time secondary classrooms where the kids come to our classes and the high schools, which is the model we use in Salt Lake that's been very effective. And so, let's see. Oh, well, I skipped it and I'm not able to go back.
Okay.
So, but that's basically the slide deck that Chair Huntsman and I and Bfcm will be presenting to the Executive Appropriations Committee with your blessing as a board.
Okay, questions from board members? Well, I'm waiting for some hands to pop up. I've got a couple that could be added to the slide as you're addressing some concerns. The employee drive slide that was in there travel right there, 105,779. Is that the actual mileage reimbursement or cost or car rental, or what's included in that fee?
That's all the hard costs that we could determine. It's not the soft costs. So it's hotel, gas mileage, and employee time.
Okay, so it has a time in it. There's
Yes.
another factor that that I think is super relevant in there, especially when this is I'm talking in a positive way that we might want to make sure we include into this space, and that is the safety side,
Yes.
the risk side. When we have limited resources, limited licensing, and then you put those on the road, there's risk associated with that, and state risk definitely can put some factors in on having that minimized. I just throw that out for your team's consideration.
Right.
Is that's particular safety.
Yeah, you know what? I think I will revise that slide and make a list of things that are not included in that, like what you just mentioned. So that's great feedback.
For some of those considerations. So we've got some hands raised now, so we'll get to them. Vice Chair Belknap, I'll keep track of this, and then Member Norton's hands. So Vice Chair Belknap.
Yes, Chair, I'll just do a couple of questions because I still am trying to figure out what issues we're trying to solve. So I guess my question is what are the schools doing now without you there? And how are these children being educated? And sidebar on that one, how is it that you're saying that these school districts want you to come? But do you have written form of that or verbal? I would really like to see something that they're requesting and the need for this in their areas.
Okay, so great questions. Yeah. So apparently before I was the superintendent, we actually had a program in Southern Utah in St. George. And due to budget cuts that happened in 2008, 2009 in that area, we had reduction in forces at USDB, and one of the first thing that went was Washington County, and USDB told them at the time, you're on your own. And so ever since that time, they've encouraged us to bring a program back. But now when we've done as good as we can with itinerant help and so forth, but the population has gotten to a point where there are not only the students that need to be served, but we have professionals that would like to live there and that already live there, that have moved in from out of state or moved down there from up north. And so it's really sustainable now, and it meets the model to serve these kids the best, balancing that. And so when you talk about Board Member Belknap, when you said you would like to see some like documentation, we have written plans with each school district, MOUs and contracts where we talk about who we're serving and what we're going to provide to them, so that we have the roles very clearly delineated. Is that kind of what you're looking for?
Chair, you okay?
Yeah, follow up.
Okay, I guess just tracking back on that, you're saying you have these MOUs. Is this an MOU for a building, or is this an MOU to serve these kids and these children? And the other question I have is, what are they doing now? Why is it that we're thinking USDB has to be there, or these kids are not going to be educated?
Oh, yeah. What we're doing now is not serving them as effectively as all the other students in the state. Superintendent Tanner, you were raising your hand. Did you?
Yeah, I did.
Answer
So,
to me?
yeah, Superintendent Tanner. I just wanted to add to what was being said. So what we're doing now is that's why they gave us rooms. They were so desperate. They knew these children needed more intensive instruction and they needed more support. So they're like, we have a room in this building. We've got one in this building. And they were so gracious to give us that, because they were seeing the need too and couldn't make it. And it was bothering and troubling them. And so that's why we're scrunched, because it was all they could give us. And then the other thing we do to support them is we provide itinerant services. So we go out and go see, and it can be a distance to travel, as you can see, but they go out and provide itinerant services to the kids, because we can't put all the kids in these rooms. We started with the younger grades, and as they grow older, it builds. But we knew we couldn't just all of a sudden get a footprint immediately with all the grade levels. So we said the younger grades, they're squashed down into those 2 rooms. We're doing what we can there, and then we're serving the rest of them itinerantly.
So let me just rephrase the question. I believe Vice Chair Belknap's question was, with these districts where these would be being built, are they behind the request to the state to build the buildings? I think that's what Vice Chair Belknap was asking.
Yeah, they are very much
in writing or encouragement.
Oh, yes. In fact, Superintendent Bergeson and Superintendent Hatch in Iron County both volunteered and said, let me know if you'd like me to write, or I will be there. They've both, and I'm going to take them up on it and say, we would be happy to come up to the legislature on the day that they review it. And so we can raise our hands when you say you've got our support here. So they're very, very engaged in supportive in this. Yes. And they'll
Chair,
yeah, follow up.
Just continuation. And what about the special ed director? So your comment, Joel, is that there are people here now who make it viable to run programs. So wouldn't it also be viable for a district to run their own program, since they have people who now live here and they could run their own programs?
Oh, yes, 100% it is. and they're running very good special education programs. But the whole reason USDB exists is because when these are what are called low incidence disabilities, it is very difficult to have the service levels that they need when they don't have it. And so having a statewide agency like this helps all those professionals be kind of like the best in the world, where each district can't necessarily find those people on their own. So it's a little bit of both. And so when we left, they did hire their own people, and mostly they developed parents of blind children or deaf children in Washington County, for example, that would go out and do their best. And then we would come in with professional development and try to help them as much as we could. But now it's at the point where, you know, the timing is right and a little bit past due, because we still have students who they're trying their best with their with their special ed department teachers, but there are enough kids now to come together into classes as they get older. So for example, when the kids leave these classrooms that I showed you, they go back to their classes with regular peers, even though they really should be at least 2 more years, if not more, with a USDB class until at least 1st or 2nd grade, a lot of them.
I think,
Okay,
Michelle,
I'm gonna defer now, Chair. I may come back.
okay, I think Michelle Tanner wanted to weigh in.
I just want to let you know, Holly, who is the special education director down at St. George, has been integral in these discussions. And so she was the one that reaches out to me most often, asking for some more help and support for the students. The one thing that's also happens when you're a teacher of the deaf or a teacher of the blind, visually impaired, and you're looking for a position, you don't think about the one child that's in Duchesne or Kanab or what the needs are across the state. They look to our schools. They look for a deaf and a blind school to seek employment. The beauty of that is if the enrollment diminishes in one area and increases in another, we can move them. Well, when they were looking to hire people in Washington, they had a real difficult time trying to recruit for those positions. What they did is they were able to find one teacher of the deaf that they had for many times. So when we assumed some of helping them with their caseloads, they had this poor teacher of the deaf on my side had over 150 students that she was trying to figure out how to serve. And they just couldn't get anybody else to do it. Whereas we have the capacity and we also have the expertise to provide the support to that teacher for ongoing professional development, for access to training that can help improve the skills. So we were able to support in that regard. So the beauty of having the model that we do is that we can go in and support as needed and move things around. And it's just really hard for a district to even recruit for those types of roles.
And thank you. Member Norton.
Yes, I would like to talk about the growth and how you're planning for that. First of all, I'd like to know, what would your current student population be like in both locations, and then what kind of data have the areas provided for you to show, what's coming up into these into your programs. I know with the early education, they've got a lot of information on data on what the kindergarten numbers should look like, and likewise what the elementary population is looking like, to give you hard and fast numbers for what your high school populations are going to look like.
So great question. In Salt Lake, we anticipate natural growth from here on out. We already have the students, we just don't have space for them and our professionals. So it's classroom and office space for existing students already. And the secondary kids that'll be served at this high school building will probably have anywhere between 55 to 75 or 80 kids, depending on how many, they come in and out every year. And so right now, we've probably got about 55, and that will grow slightly, but not huge. The St. George area, we have over 150 students that we serve. I say St. George, but really it's all of southwestern Utah that will be served from that center in St. George. Those are itinerant and classroom kids. Right now, so with that many, you can tell that right now with 2 borrowed classrooms, and actually when our portable's done in June, we'll actually have 4 classrooms that will appropriately house the 4 teachers that we currently have, but we probably need about 3 times that much to effectively serve that and give the flexibility to the families for the kids to come into the campus or for us to serve them in an itinerant way. And then if Superintendent Tanner has additional information from that, do you think that was a?
I think that's great. The only thing I would add is that typically, just so when to effectively teach our student populations, that's usually about 5 in a classroom. I know that that seems small for most people, but that is difficult when you have different communication needs or different disabilities, significant disabilities in the classroom. So in any deaf or hard of hearing or blind visually impaired classroom, you'll see not just our state, but across the nation, those are a lot smaller classes. They're usually 5 to 10 in a classroom. You go past 10 and that's too much, way too much. You usually do not see a class that goes beyond 10 unless it's a very homogeneous group of high school students. And that's usually about it. So when you talk about classrooms, we're talking smaller numbers, just to keep that in mind, because that's what's been found to be effective in the research.
Do you have a follow-up, Member Norton?
Do not, thank you.
Okay. I'm not seeing either hands. Well, yep. Well, let me throw my question out there. Another thing that popped into my brain, and I just better put it out on the table here, is I believe that you said that the land was donated by the St. George property was donated by the school district. And
Yes.
I guess this is more for the DFCM because they're the ones that the state actually, it's their building. It's a state building, it's not USDB's building. It's not Washington School District building, but I think there's some weird hoops or some challenges that comes from land that is purchased by a school district and then going back to a government entity. I'm sure somebody's jumping through those hoops.
Yes.
On that through the DFCM. My other question, and then we'll go to Vice Chair Belknap, is with the DFCM, and I looked at the one chart on those increases in costs per square foot. I am not seeing that in my professional business in the vertical world of building builds, where 21 to 22, I think it showed 10% on there. I'm seeing a 2 and a 0 or a 2 and a 5 in there, and that's one of my biggest concerns, major concerns as a board. And if the board moves this forward, in that is who's on the hook once you start this commitment. Is there a process or a program within the state to see that these projects get built, or do they get scaled back? I mean, that's right now I'm seeing government entities really questioning whether they build or not with these inflated construction costs. And then the other part of it, is there even a contractor? And I'm sure these are questions more for the DFCM, and I wasn't in your meeting earlier that was addressed, is can you find a contractor to build? And the other piece is these inflation industry escalation history numbers, how legit, especially that last one is with inflation, war for talent, and construction costs taken off. Can you speak to that concern?
I can. Those are some of the things we discussed, and Jim Russell, who's the director of DFCM, said, yeah, we're facing this all over. The estimates we got did include a calculation for inflation, which is part of the reason that the buildings are costing what they are, even though they're not super big buildings. So these are going to be 3-year projects. It takes 1 year just for planning and design. So at that point, it will be, and then it takes 2 years for construction of each of these buildings, the way the state builds them. And so after this first year, if they see that something's out of whack, they could adjust that in the next legislative session, but they think they have captured it as well as possible. And I said, well, that's why we're telling you what the kids need and what the programs need in these 2 areas. We're trusting you and the architect who did the programming work. We did an RFP and had an architect work with them so that we had 2 sets of very very well-established eyeballs on this. The other factor that helps with this, Chairman, is that even these estimates, they were like 12 and a half. I don't have it there, but they were like 12 million and 15 million. So that's 27 million, but the appropriation is actually for $30 million. So there's even additional wiggle room in the appropriation above what DFCM has estimated.
Okay, thank you. I hopefully didn't lose her. Vice Chair Belknap, are you still with us? No. Member Norton.
So that brings a concern to me in building special buildings. And when you're talking like 150 students in Southwestern Utah and the growth in Northern Utah, that's, basically it sounds like we're already out of room and we haven't even started. Why are we not just adapting the district schools to add in some extra special ed rooms that will meet these needs in these, at least in these two areas? It seems like it would be closer to the families and, more integrated into those schools. So that I'm just worried that we're building a centralized building in an area that's growing quickly, that's going to be, will be out of space and before that building is finished.
Okay, before Superintendent Scott Jones' hands raised, did you want to weigh in on before the Superintendent Coleman speak? So Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones.
No, sir. If we could get the board members' questions taken care of first, I just have some additional guidance from the legislature, the LFAs, on particulars related to the EAC presentation.
Okay, Superintendent Coleman.
And just one more, let me just add on to that question, just one tiny bit.
Okay.
Especially when, we're wanting to get these students in their local schools as much as possible anyway. Okay, now I'll be quiet.
Yes, thank you. Good question there. So the reason we can't just have these districts build an additional special ed room, well, there's several reasons. Number one, the districts already do provide what they can there, but this is for needs that are not one district specific. So for example, that was the model for a long time, and the legislature changed the law to say the districts are not required to do that anymore, because what always happened is there's no mechanism to force them to do it. Number one, they're independent government entities of their own. Number two, they serve these facilities serve many districts. So whenever you have classrooms that are owned by a district, and these are very few classrooms, right? I mean, whenever you have one, the district, and as the districts grow, they say, sorry, that's our property. Push comes to shove, we need that back. And then we end up adjusting kids' IEPs to send them back when they're the ones that actually needed to be centrally located in a special program, if that makes sense there. And another thing that's comforting with this a little bit is that our growth rate does not have to match the growth rate of the surrounding community, because we are a small drop in the bucket, and the kids come in and out of our programs sometimes. So what we have now in both buildings is we already have the increased need there. We need to build for the capacity of that, and it's not growing. It hasn't been instant growth. It's been over a long time. And now that we have a critical mass of something in each place, it makes sense to house them. And we are building a couple extra classrooms in each building for future growth, but USDB will not experience the exponential growth that the communities. It will be more gradual growth. And so one thing we learned in our other two buildings, like Springville most recently, is the legislature told us, don't underbuild because you're trying to save money. Build what you're going to need for the next 10 to 20 years at least. And that's what went into the calculation with this architect and DFCM also. And so I don't think we're going to run the risk of saying we build this and now all of a sudden we need more. Although in Springville, we did leave land at the end of each building so we could add 4 more classrooms one day if we need it. And the growth pattern that we projected has proven to be accurate. Each year, those classes move up into the next one, and some kids go back to their schools, others come into our schools, but the plan is working so far, and we're using all of the things we learned with those buildings to build these in a very cost-effective way, but also to handle the actual need that's there and not get into the business of the things that the districts could provide on their own.
Thank you.
Superintendent Jones?
Thanks, sir. Hey, Superintendent Coleman, the board mentioned, about letters of support from the superintendents, and having them testify is great. That's good. But if we could get those written letters. Then you mentioned the code, and I think this is going to be important too. So, and I think it's relevant to the discussion right now is, so you said the code was repealed. Are you saying that, so the way it reads now in 53E-8-410, it says school districts to provide space for programs. A school district with students who reside within the school district's boundaries and are served by the Utah Schools for the Deaf and the Blind shall make a good faith effort to provide the Utah Schools for the Deaf and the Blind with space required for programs offered by the Utah Schools for the Deaf and the Blind. Sir, is that the code you're saying was repealed?
Yes, it is. Previously, it was a requirement that they were required to do that, and there was no enforcement mechanism. And so when it was Representative LeVar Christensen and Representative Bruce Cutler at the time before each of them left, they were doing a review of special education laws code. Remember when all the codes turned over to 53E and F and G and all that? They went through this part with the deaf and the blind, and they said, how's this working? And we said, well, frankly, they don't, and there's no way to enforce it because they own that. The state doesn't own that property and so forth. And so I think they do work in good faith to give us space when it's available. It's just that where we have the greatest need, there's never space available. And so either the law needs to have some enforcement mechanism, or we need to make this a more realistic description of what the actual practice is. And they chose at that time to put the language there about you should make a good faith effort to do this, but you're not required to anymore.
Yes, sir. Okay. So they're not required to show that they made a good faith effort to provide you space there.
No, it's kind of intent language. And that was the decision, and based on discussions with the districts and the legislature together at that time.
Okay. And sir, for the board, and then potentially depending on the board's direction for their benefit, how many students in Washington County School District does the USDB serve today?
Michelle Tanner maybe would be able to answer that better than I would. Well, for the deaf school, I don't know about the blind.
Yeah, for the deaf school, we have about 20 kids in the preschool through K. Of course, they're growing up. And then we also help serve with the itinerant classrooms, which, as I said, was divided about, there's still around 150 that are out in the itinerant that could potentially, if we had a building, we would have considered that as an option to have a self-contained class, but we just didn't because they're older. So we serve them itinerantly. So about 20 right now in the self-contained classrooms, in the preschool classrooms and the kindergarten.
And for the blind, we generally see a ratio much less than the deaf across the state. And so we will be prepared with those exact numbers before we go to the EAC.
Yeah. And then sir, Chair, if I may follow on to that,
yeah.
Just for preparation and making sure that the board is informed for the decision on, the way ahead for EAC. So, sir, does Washington County School District meet the 3% threshold, or, the requirement?
They are above the 3%.
They're above the 3%, right? So do you contract with them, sir?
Yes, we do.
Okay. And so,
but not in these classrooms.
Right.
Classrooms that they've given us become USDB classrooms. So there's no contract. Those students are on USDB IEPs and so forth. We contract with them for all of the itinerant services we do for the 150 or so kids in the region that are not in the classrooms.
The 150 kids that are Washington County School District kids.
Yes, we also yes, but we do not contract with Iron County. We do MOUs with them because they're below the 3% threshold.
Right. Okay. In Iron County. Yes, sir. So ultimately, I think that at some point we all need to be prepared for EAC to ask this question. With the number of students that are being served by USDB in the schools, how many will end up in the building? And we know,
Yes.
or we recognize that you say, you know, it depends on their individual education program. Right now, though, with 20 deaf students in the ratio to that, it does look like the maximum number of kids that would go into that building is somewhere in the ballpark of 30 or.
Oh, no, there would be more than that. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, for example, if they took away one of the classrooms, then we would have 10, right? It's not that we don't need those kids don't need classrooms. It says we don't have them. So I see what you mean. We will have a very good, reliable estimate for that before the EAC meeting on how many we anticipate, because we had that in order to work with on the pre-programming with the architect and so forth. We have all those numbers.
Okay, great,
Yeah.
sir. Lastly, too, inevitably, and not just for USDB, but there's always the question, I think this is relevant for this action or process today, is are you going to make additional requests for FTEs if the building is built? If so, how many? And then what are the impacts to your transportation contract? Are you going to transport kids into the building or you know, to from? And will that mean additional funding is required for FTEs or logistics, right? Transportation, feeding, you know, things like that. You're probably not ready to answer that here, but
The answers to both will be yes. And also we do need the numbers for that for sure.
Right. So you will be, if the building is approved, it gets thing, then you will be requesting additional FTEs. Will you be requesting additional funding for transportation?
Yes. Well, yes.
Can I address that? Is that all right?
Yeah, Michelle, go ahead.
I was just gonna mention, right now, we have to set up different routes to do different locations. It would save us money once they're all in one location, because we have to drive, we can't have them all come in, they all start school around the same time. So there has to be different routes. So even if a child who's older, we put the older kids in one classroom and then the preschool kids in another. So what happens is, even though they could have used the same route, we couldn't, because they all are coming at the same time to two different separate, and they're not next to each other at all. So there would be some cost savings in that regard, in that we're in one location instead of having to transport to two different locations.
Yeah, the main hit will be the FTEs of teachers. Every time there's a new classroom, we would have a new teacher, and then also the related servers for the area. So we'll do that good faith estimate as well.
So we've got member Norton's hands raised, but Superintendent's question, or Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones' questions is a lot of what he's asking about would be in like a pro forma. If you do this, then that. So there's not surprises. So the legislature doesn't, or this board doesn't end up being victims of one decision and then have these cascading effects and emergencies. And well, we can't do our job now because we built a building, or we built two buildings. And I think that's where Deputy Superintendent Jones was kind of coming from, is what's next if in this space. So thank you for the questions, Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones. Some of those were on my list. To Member Norton.
Yes, I guess I'm still concerned with the numbers. I would like to know, you know, even if we have to just go with one of these districts, you know, there are 20, you know, I'd like to know hard and fast numbers for at least right now. You know, for pre-K, we have 20 students in Washington County, and for 1 through 5 or 1 through 6, we have this many. And then, you know, secondary, how many do we have? Because when we talk about did you say the itinerant students? I don't know if those are coming or going, or we don't know, or do we need a building for them, or sometimes we need a building. So I'm not really comfortable with the number of students that we are building a building for now, I guess is my question. So, and you probably don't have that right now, but I think before this, you know, I think that's going to be a top question for bringing this forward and getting the final stamp of approval. You know, what are the numbers and not just maybes.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes,
Okay.
I concur. I think that's consistent with what Superintendent Jones was saying too. We concur. You're right on.
Well, where I'm seeing some of the questions and then but I'm just speculating where this is going to go. When is our executive approach without,
It's
I
on
don't
May,
want to lose my split screen and
it's on May 17th.
okay. And today's the 6th. Okay, questions from board members. Member Norton, your hand's still raised. Did you have additional questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Sincerely, thank you. As you can tell, a lot of work has gone into, we weren't asked to do this kind of work on the previous buildings. And so we've spent a lot of time on this, and this discussion with board members like Superintendent or like Board Member Norton's questions and Superintendent Jones, this is very helpful to get all these details right before we go to EAC. And so we really deeply appreciate your feedback on that. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I'm not headed to EAC unless there's a motion that's coming from this body, because that's part of the process here.
Yeah.
That was stipulated in here. Is there anyone that wants to make a motion on this? Member Booth.
I have been listening in on the telephone to all of the questions, all of the discussion, and having been on a couple other boards where we have done a lot with DCFS and where we have built large buildings and the thorough nature of their preparation, I concur with you, Chair Huntsman, and with everybody that has brought up questions that we've got to continue to answer the questions and be well prepared, because the competition is unlike any other time in the history of the state of Utah for these dollars. And if we're going to get them, we better very well, I mean, really have established the need. I'm confident that the need is there. And so we've just got to do a little bit more homework to make sure that we present that need in a way that, okay, this is kind of where we are, and hopefully we'll have this many, and it's just got to be very clear, very precise. And I would move that we approve the next step of moving this project to the Executive Appropriations Committee, and that we direct staff and Superintendent Coleman to finish the presentation, filling in the blanks and providing the facts and the information that will really ensure that we can sail this right through with full support.
I will second that.
So who's running the screen to write it down? Because I perceived a motion that if a motion came from here, that it would state that the board approved the USDB's request for construction of both the Salt Lake and St. George building, and to move forward to the Executive Appropriations Committees on May 17th for their consideration and approval. And I would
So
add in
moved.
there, that we'd modify the slides to address the questions and the concerns that the board had today. I think is what would be maybe your motion. So discussion to the motion, member Hanson.
Yeah, you know, after hearing the discussion today and the questions that have been raised, I'm really hesitant to have this go forward to EdApprops without us seeing what a finished product presentation looks like. I agree. I think there'll be a lot of questions and I'm not satisfied they'll all be answered satisfactorily. What's the next opportunity? I mean, we had an October 1st date in the presentation slide that's shown up above us. If we hold this back and review this again as the board for USDB before it goes to EdApprops, what's the effect of that?
Well, you have a couple options. If it doesn't move forward, well, Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, your hand's raised. I'll let you answer the question and I'll fill in if you left something out. Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So to answer Board Member Hanson's question, you know, you can see item number 2 on the slide that's currently forward facing is that, you know, the intent is that we come and present to EAC before October 1st, 2022. My understanding was, and Superintendent Coleman can correct me if I'm wrong, there is a sense of urgency behind this, you know, which is why we were pursuing this in front of the board here today, so that if the board directed, we could present, you know, at the May 17th EAC. And finally, the next opportunity would be their September meeting. So the EAC meets in May and they meet in September. So if the board does, you know, have more questions and wants to see a product, then the next opportunity wouldn't be until September. So,
well, unless we, before the 17th, call a special board meeting for USDB with these questions answered on, better addressed than what we had today, with better assurances on those answers. I mean, that's still an opportunity.
So so to get clarity, is the board looking for just that specific estimate of students that will be in St. George in the building once it's built in 3 years and moving forward?
So my note taking, which I'm not the recorder, but as I was inventorying loose ends here, there's a couple things. One was occupancy, how many and what is going to happen in that place, and that's somewhere found in the programming through the architect, through that architect thing. But that expectation, that's one question. The other question was support. What kind of actual support, whether it was in writing or not? That was a question that was asked from those districts that are right there in that region. The other question that was asked on here is additional legislative asks on staffing, or is it transportation? Those questions, once these facilities were built, those were the 3 that I inventoried just in my random note taking of questions asked without defined specificity in the answer. Hey, I said that word. I usually can't say that word since COVID. Maybe I'm cured, but those were the 3, unless Superintendent Jones or staff, did you catch other questions? Those were the 3 major ones that I had on there to better support the pro forma.
and Chair Huntsman, Scott, if I may.
Yes, Deputy
But just real
Superintendent.
quickly, you might have cut out, well, you did cut out, so I might have missed it. But
So let me turn my video off.
It's critical that in addition to what Chair Huntsman named there, and if I missed it, I apologize, the support, the written letters and support from Iron County and Washington County School District saying that they need these buildings for the kids. So, that it's there. To your point, Superintendent Coleman, when you did answer the question, you were asked, does the superintendents and special education directors from both districts support these buildings? You said yes. Letters in the backups would be great. Then also, to your point, sir, Superintendent Coleman, you said that they would come and testify. I didn't catch if Chair Huntsman had that on his list or not. I think he might have, but.
Yeah, I did. I turned my
Okay.
video off because
Okay.
my internet, I don't know what's happening here.
I think it was on my end, sir, not
Yeah.
yours.
If I can follow up, Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that what I heard as well and what I would expect is the pro forma that included all of the support plan. So staff, all of that. And then also an analysis of the next best alternatives. So what other possibilities are there and why are those not? And we heard some discussion of that today. I mean, the classroom space wouldn't be guaranteed is what I heard, that if it was allocated, that it might go away if growth occurred in the districts and they might not dedicate that. But I think that that's an important alternative as well, because once we do build a brick and mortar building, we lose flexibility, which might be there if we're in district space to either grow or shrink. But anyway, those are the things that I heard. The timing as far as how all this goes forward, I'm not in a good position to, say how important it is that we get before May 15th, but I'm a little frustrated, I guess, to have this come before us on the 6th. And then, on the 17th, we want to have it in front of the Ed Approps Committee without having a chance to really have this back and forth.
Well, maybe I can speak to that for a second, if that's all right, Chairman.
Yes, please.
So a couple of things. Number one, we're already doing the next best option, which is we're not serving kids appropriately. And we're supposed to be here to help the districts who really struggle to do that with deaf and blind children. That's why USDB was set up. So the next best alternative is currently happening. We've got teachers that just teach out of their cars and homes, and the itinerant teachers, they don't have, if the districts were to just employ those teachers, then they don't have the ability to give them professional development. So we kind of band-aid this along. And also the next best alternative is that most importantly, a lot of these kids are not in classrooms with their peers, and they are struggling. Every year that's delayed is like a lifetime for a child. You know how long a school year can be. And when you can't communicate and interact with your peers and you're isolated, then it might be the next best alternative, but it's not a best alternative at all. So when it comes to, I don't have any problem with the support letters and that documentation and the pro forma. We already produced something like that. I just probably should have had it in this slideshow. But this is not a last minute thing. We've been working on this for over a year, and we did a lot of professional work and development with people that know better than us how to figure out the numbers and buildings and so forth. So I apologize if we gave you that impression that this is just something that we didn't think through, but getting the presentations right, and that's why we wanted the interaction of the board. Also, as the board, your fiduciary responsibility is to the whole system, but when it comes to USDB, your fiduciary duty is to the students, the deaf and blind students at USDB. And if there's something we've done that makes you think that somehow we're not going to be ready for the legislature, no, we'll totally be ready for this. The timeline is, with the 3-year build out, the 2 other buildings that we've built with Bfcm, we never got in on time. And so we had people moving in during January to Springville most recently, and they tried their best. And so if we push this out to September, October release of the funds, then we've lost almost 6 months of a 3-year project where we could have been doing the RFPs for planning and design, architecture, and lining things up so that the funds could be released July 1st. And so unless you have a significant concern that we've misrepresented things, understanding that we need to provide more of this information that you've helped us detail. Unless you have a significant concern that there's a misrepresentation here, I really encourage the board to approve this approve the chair. So if you can see in the wording here, the State Board of Education, which is Chair Huntsman, is going to present this on the 17th. And so understanding your concerns and so forth, I'd really encourage you to allow us to proceed at that point with whatever contingencies you need so we can provide this information that you've requested to you ahead of time.
And Superintendent Coleman, I have an awesome board here, and when they vote to say yes to something, they like to turn over a lot of rocks. They want all of that justification and that in place, and they support their votes in different ways. And so that's why the questions, I believe that's why the questions are being asked, and especially in more of that pro forma type world. And in that space, so I'm not surprised at all by the questions, but and we'll see where this as this plays out. Member Norton, your hand's raised.
Yes, I just wanted to add one more thing on that list, and it's not adding one more thing, it's just clarifying a little bit more on those statements of support from others. You know, right now we're all in the honeymoon stage. I think that needs to be pretty specific on what that support means. You know, we talked about who owns the building and how does that work. That needs to be nailed down. The contributions going forward, you know, 3%, whatever, memos of understanding. I think that, you know, what does that support mean? I think that needs to be pretty specific in this as well. It's just my opinion. Thanks.
Yeah, that's all very, very well settled.
So I see this going two directions right now. I see that, well, right now we have a motion and a second. We have a motion on the table. And it takes 8 votes to move the motion forward. If it doesn't move forward and it's lacking it, I don't have a problem calling another board meeting when more of the specificity is spelled out in this and bringing it back to the board. I know this is big. I know there's timing. I'm also scared to death of every build that's happening out there with from schedules and timelines and everything else that's getting tipped over in this space. It's a scary time to build. I understand that also. Member Norton, your hand's still raised, but I'm going to go to Member Straight. Speaking to the motion.
Oh, I appreciate the questions that have been asked, and my thought is regardless of the outcome of the vote, I would like the presentation to come back to us so we can increase the chances of it to move forward, because I think the great questions that have been asked are going to further refine, and I would like to refine it one more time before it goes. But anyway, that's my thought.
You're the second on the vote, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so again, this can go a couple different ways on this. If the maker of the motion wants to withdraw the motion, I'll set up another board meeting. I don't want to run the risk.
Could we possibly try the motion, vote, and then if that doesn't pass, then we set up another board meeting?
Yeah, as the one that's taking it to the executive committee, it will pass, but then they know what's happening, and did it narrowly pass? Did it pass in a good way? You know,
right, I understand.
I think the optics is pretty important there. That's my concern moving forward to this body.
Well, I'm happy to withdraw the motion if that's the most efficient, so we can go ahead and get the next meeting scheduled, and then we can have a very strong vote after all the information's in line.
Well, I want to thank you, Member Booth. I think that's in the best interest of all the work that's being done here. Member Earl.
Point of order, don't we have to, unless you can withdraw that unless someone objects to it? Is that accurate?
We have parliamentarians here without objections.
Yeah, so I think we take the vote. So we'll either have to vote on withdrawing the motion or take the vote on the motion. So if I'm accurate in saying that, I don't think you can just withdraw something without either vote on it or unless no one objects to it.
So
Can we ask if anyone objects to it?
Yeah, who's objecting?
to object to the.
I am. Let's take the vote. And if it doesn't pass, then we can make another motion to have another meeting.
Okay. So there is an objection to have it withdrawn. So we have a motion before the board. If that's what we want to do here. The motion before the board is that the board approve the USDB's request for construction of both the Salt Lake and St. George building and to move forward to the Executive Appropriations Committee on May 17th for their consideration and approval. And I didn't write all this down, and modify the slide deck to respond to all the questions and concerns. I'm not seeing any discussion to the motion. Members, please vote at this time.
I need clarification. We are voting to send it forward.
Yes. Okay, so keep your. I've got 8 yes votes, 2 no, member Hanson and member Norton. Is that what you've got?
I see 9 yes votes just on my screen, so you might want to call
there
it
we
out.
go. Yep, I see 9. I see Molly down. I gotta slide it down. Thank you. Okay, the motion passes. So we'll still modify this slide deck, and we will get it before the board before the presentation.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you
Okay.
for your helpful input too. It's great.
Let's move to 5.4 enrichment fund project list.
Okay, board members, thank you. This is the enrichment fund request list that was approved by the advisory council as per your policy, and it's very similar to previous ones that you might recognize, and you can see the changes that have made there from previous years. Superintendent Tanner, do you have any additional input on any of these for the board?
Superintendent Tanner.
I am happy to answer any questions they may have regarding the list. They're very similar to last year. There's some we've taken off. Those are the ones that are crossed out. So you can see that those were not needed, so we didn't request those. Pretty similar to last year's list.
Okay, questions on this list? We still have voting on showing up on my queue here. Questions or motion? If I'm not seeing any questions, and I'll seek a motion that the board approve the fiscal year 23 enrichment fund project list. Member Hart?
Yeah, I had both a question and then a motion. This is the fund that keeps you from having to, this is where you draw from to pay for things so that you don't have to charge fees, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. All right, then let me pull up the motion.
All of this money is generated by deaf and blind trust land.
So Member Norton, if you wanted to, I can just read it real fast if you want to say it, give a so moved while you're bringing it up.
I'm ready.
Okay, hit it.
Oh, wait. No, you can say that. That would be fine, Chair. That'd be great.
Seeking a motion that the board approve the fiscal year 23 enrichment fund project list.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Member Straight, you want to speak to the motion?
No, thank you.
Okay, discussion to the motion. Seeing none, the motion before the board is that the board approve the fiscal year 23 enrichment fund project list. Board members at this time, please vote. The voting is complete and it passes unanimously. Thank you. Next, we'll go to item 5.5, student fee policy. Superintendent Coleman.
Thank you. This is the policy that needed approval following the second month of public input, in addition to the fee schedule, which you approved a few items earlier. The policy is the same as what we presented last month, and it's here for your vote so that we can be in compliance with state law that requires this motion by the board.
Thank you for the description. Questions or motions from the board members? Not seeing any hands raised. In the interest of time, I seek a motion that the board approve the USDB student fee policy. Oh, I do have a hand raised. Member Hutchings.
Yep, just to make the motion that the board approves the student fee policy.
Second, Member Cannon.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. You want to speak to the motion? Member Hutchings?
It's a good policy. Please vote for it.
Okay. Any discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the board is that the board approve the USDB student fee policy. Board members at this time, please vote. Is Member Lear still with us? I didn't see that one. Oh, there we go. Voting is complete and the motion passes unanimously. Okay, next is a discussion item, USDB budget review.
Thank you. We have a special guest with us today because Finance Director, actually we have two special guests. I'll introduce the first one now and one later. Director Carl Empey is on a very awesome vacation with his family, which is well needed. And so we have Vicki Summers with us, who is the finance manager that works for Mr. Empey. And so Vicki, I will allow you to explain this to the board if you don't mind.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Madam Vice Chairs and board members. The financial reports that I'm going to present today for USDB are for the 9 months that ended on March 31st of 2022. There is a different slide that goes with the financial report. Would you like, Superintendent Coleman, would you like me to share my screen?
Sure.
If I'm allowed?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm able to approve it though. It's not my meeting.
Can I request permission to share?
Sybil, can it?
Chair, what was the question?
Trying to share a screen. So Superintendent Coleman, could you have clicked on it and bring it up or?
I only have the agenda, so.
Oh, okay.
There are share rights for everybody.
Okay, you should be able to do it now, Vicki.
Thank you.
All right. Let me make sure that I've got the right screen. I apologize. I'll share the correct one this time. All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your patience. I knew I had it hidden somewhere. All right, so these are the financial reports for the 9 months ending March the 31st. USDB is financially solvent, having revenues of 37.4 million and expenditures of 32.5. You will see that I've rounded the numbers to in the interest of time, so we'll just skim through these. That gives us our revenues and expenditures that we have then a surplus of 4.9 million.
Vicky, I'm just seeing a spreadsheet on mine.
Yeah,
Oh.
there's one right before that, the financial report. That was in our
Okay.
packet.
Well, I apologize. I thought I had this all set.
Which a lot of accountants prefer to look at this kind of spreadsheet than a dashboard summary report that is kinder to my eyes, but
Well, you know, it's so normal for me to see that all day long that I didn't even notice any difference. All right, I think I've got it. Third time is a charm. Thank you very much.
good
Chair
job.
All right, well, so we'll start one more time. The financial report I'm presenting today is for USDB is for the 9 months ending on March the 31st. In the interest of time, I've rounded the numbers so that we can move through this kind of quickly. USDB is financially solvent with revenues of 37.4 million, expenditures of 32.5, leaving us a surplus of 4.9 million. Moving down, you'll see here that this is the number of our students that we have served. For March of 2022, we've served 2,679 students. That's about 50 more than last month, and that follows the 7-month trend of being able to serve more students in the current month than we did in the previous month. So that's a nice trend that we have that we're able to continue on. Okay, we'll move over to our, we'll move down to our enrichment funds. Total. The total of our enrichment funds to date is a little bit more than 954,000. Our donated fund totals are just over 281,000. And our USDB Education Foundation balance is 1.25 million. All right, going forward, this budget status report are the details of what constitutes all of the totals that were just presented. This was provided for your review, and at this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions on these totals, if anybody has any.
Questions? I'm not seeing any. I sure like getting these in advance and how everything's formatted, especially the front slide. It's kind of a dashboard, easier on my eyes, but we can certainly drill out into the details. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly better than the first spreadsheet that came up. And I will say that Director Impey is the one who has had these set up, and so he made it a very nice format for me to be able to follow. So I'd like to be able to take the praise on that, but I will give it to where it deserves, and that's with Director Impey. All right.
Well, thank you for participating in our meeting today.
Thank you. I have just one more quick one. I just wanted to go over the enrichment fund projects and where we are on those. In May of last year, the advisory council approved us 1.526 million for the enrichment fund projects for this year, and so that we can, provide wonderful and opportunities for our students that they wouldn't normally otherwise be able to have. Of that, we've had actual expenditures of 856,000. And then we do have that 200,000 that's encumbered for our audiology van, which I hear is going to be delivered to us soon. It's been a long process getting that to us, but super excited that that's getting close. So we do have that encumbered. And that leaves us for the remainder of the year, the 469,000 that we can then spend for our students. And that now concludes the financial report that I had for you today.
Okay. Any questions? I'm not seeing any, but I just went back to my notes of things to ask in this meeting. And one of them on the financing was we made a motion in our last meeting about, Member Earl knows of it. She moved the motion forward, Braille machines. So all of that expense or within that motion, does that stay in, maybe this is a question for Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones. Does that stay at USBE, or do we move funds over and then they handle those expenditures? Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, can you speak to that? I'm excited about that.
So, sir, let me just make sure I understand your question. Are you talking about the enrichment funds? If we move those over?
No, this is not just enrichment. This is over the budget, on the budget side. Sorry.
So, and if you'll recognize Assistant Superintendent Jacobson, there are some funds that we do that come to us and then we move over to them, and Deborah's got the list of those funds that we do. But for the most part, since USDB is state funded, that falls into their fund, right? Their own fund. They're directly funded. So can you call on Assistant Superintendent Jacobson to verify what I just said?
Yes, Assistant Superintendent Jacobson, are you with us? My question is regarding the motion that we had that was made by Member Earl on our Braille.
Oh, yeah, okay.
On those Braille machine, do we move the funds over into here, different line items, or do we just manage all of that on our side? That's the question.
Yes, that will actually go to USDB as grant funds. Those are being paid out of some of our Corona relief funding, out of the ESSER funds. So they'll receive it as a grant and they'll submit for reimbursement once those have been purchased.
Grant, so it stays in our court, not in their court. So it's a reimbursement on the grant. Thank you.
Correct.
That answers my question.
Sorry, sir. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing any other hands raised. Vicki, do you have anything else you want to present to us? Another spreadsheet or two, or?
Well, if you guys would like a nap, I could probably pull something up.
These guys have had a big couple of weeks here.
Yeah. So no, that was all that I had.
All right. Hey, thank you.
Yes.
Superintendent's report is next. Superintendent.
Thank you. The second special guest that we have today, I wanted to introduce you to Dr. Michelle Tanner, who is just received word this week that she's officially Dr. Tanner now. She defended her dissertation last week, and I just think that's awesome. I was already impressed that she had 2 master's degrees, but welcome, Dr. Tanner. It's an honor to work with you, and we're all very, very proud of you.
Congrats.
Okay, quickly, my list here is, as you can see, we are winding down our budget process. And so that has been a great bit of work, and we're grateful for Carl Empey and his team, including Vicki, who you can probably tell just in your few minutes online with her that she is awesome as well. Another thing we've been doing a lot lately is working on this EAC presentation that we just went through. And so that's, we're actually excited to go before the EAC after we get you the additional information that you requested, because it'll be nice to move on with that. We hosted the CEASD conference in April, which Dr. Tanner might talk to you about in just a moment, but it was fantastic. It was all the superintendents of deaf schools across the country. They came here, they toured our building, and our students walked them through the way they did previously with the League of Innovative Schools. And superintendents were absolutely blown away. I was I probably at least 4 or 5 times I had a superintendent come up to me and say, your staff is amazing. Where have you found all these people? And that was unsolicited. And of course I feel that way. It's like your own family you like to brag on, but to hear others recognize that as they presented, and it was just great to see what an influence Utah is having in that world. One of those items I wanted to mention specifically is our USD Online Asl School. And I know Board Member Cannon has been good year after year, month after month, sometimes saying, how is that ASL online school coming? There is one other school that's offering online school, and it's the American School for the Deaf in Connecticut. It's the first deaf school in America. It goes back, it's as old as Gallaudet, older than Gallaudet, actually. And they are a private school, and they are charging like $5,000 a course. And they came to us asking us, well, how are you doing this? How are you doing that? And we are collaborating. Now we're pulling in other deaf schools from around the Intermountain West. And we already have 17 full courses that are developed and many others that are under development. And on our website, we were recently approved to become part of the Utah SOEP program, the online education program. So any students in Utah can now benefit from our classes that are not only for kids using ASL, they're also captioned for kids that are just hard of hearing, or any regular ed student could take our classes too. And we're producing these classes with special ed codes as well. So it's really an accessible piece. And the staff members, the USBE staff members in that division has been very supportive and excited and welcoming to us as we finally have a product that's kind of ready for prime time now, and anyone in the state can access it. And so I knew you would like that, Board Member Ken, and that's really exciting for us. The next thing that we had to report on, facilities, you heard St. George will be done in June. Mill Creek is all done, just waiting for the fire marshal to sign off on the fire alarm, and they'll be able to use that building now that school is almost over. We've been training on Lake Powell for the 70-48 race. We have one more training that we will do before heading up there in June. That'll be on Willard Bay, I think. And we've recently had our prom, and we have graduation events coming up. You should have received those via email if you're interested in attending. 8-on-8 football is progressing nicely. I heard Board Member Straight report on his experience yesterday to you, and he's been a tremendous help and strength to us. I'm glad that he was able to interview these coaches. We actually had great applicants, and we found a head coach that's fabulous. And so we're just working on getting him onboarded now, and we've ordered some very expensive equipment, and we're off and running. So a lot of excitement in the community for 8-on-8 football. The school for the blind is currently, you might have noticed Superintendent Patton is missing. She's in London right now. They left on Tuesday, and they'll be there for about 10 days with the blind students, and they're having a fantastic experience already using all those things. As much as I love deaf students, I'm always really excited to hear what the blind students experience internationally. From that one time in Sydney, Australia, where they put them on a street corner and said, get back to the hotel all the way across town. You got 3 hours. And they did it, and they felt more empowered than they had ever been in their lives. So I'm excited to hear about the kids coming back from London, what they have to report. We would have had a report for you from the deaf kids today, except they came to our advisory council this past week and interacted with them, and it was fabulous to hear from them. We would have had them with you, but online isn't quite the same experience, and so there'll be more to follow. And I'm probably stealing the thunder from Dr. Tanner, but anyway, that's all I have, unless Michelle, if you would like to, as part of the superintendent's report, add a few details on anything from USD.
Superintendent.
I think you did an excellent job. Those are the topics I was going to cover, and I think you nailed them.
Okay. Board members, that's all we have for you as part of our report then.
Okay. Questions? Board members. Member Lear.
I just wanted to report that, I mean, it's interesting and wonderful to hear these sort of abstract reports from Superintendent Coleman and now Dr. Tanner. But I had an experience about a week ago where a young woman in my neighborhood, who I work with pretty closely, is part of your team for the, and I forget the exact name of it, but the rowing team. And it has just given her such a huge sense of confidence, and her family just can't believe how it's improved her. She has some problems, sometimes some mental health problems, but she is just blossomed with this experience. So it's so wonderful to hear about it personally, and it makes all the difference in the world. I just wanted to pass that on.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'm not seeing any hands raised, so thank you. I think this concludes our USDB meeting. I'm not seeing anything else on the agenda.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Take care. Okay. You guys take care. We will next. You guys see the clock. You guys see the clock, don't you? What time it is? I know I have a hard stop at 3:15 to get with some clients. I'm not seeing. Do we go in? Well, we're way over time on this, and so I'm looking at, especially where the two vice chairs very much so wanted the strategic plan in on this meeting to have this dialogue. Member Earl, your hand is raised.
I would just say that if it's just, yes, sorry,
ahead.
my video is, every time I turn a video on, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Every time I turn my video on, it shuts down the whole thing. So it's not on. So I do apologize for that. I just think if this is going through the slide deck that's here, and not that Sarah always does an incredible job, but if we wanted to just do that and then save anything else for next time, I think that would be appropriate. So we're done on time.
Okay. So this, if we can just, without objection, we can quickly walk through the slide deck in this presentation for the next 15 minutes. Is that doable? Is Sarah?
Yeah, so Chair, the way this was framed was kind of through an engagement activity.
That's right.
And so noting the time, I certainly don't want to hold anyone after class. That's never good on a Friday afternoon. And so, I defer to the chair on what's best, but I'd be happy to come back at a later date.
And I would like to spend quite a bit of time on this. That's fully allotted on it, and then let's get it in our June meeting. But I appreciate everyone's efforts today. So this is gonna end a few minutes early. I want to thank you guys for your attendance today to your committee meetings. I know there's a lot of work. I know staff was jumping from meeting to meeting, so thank you for your efforts there, and then also for your really good questions on the time that we spent on the buildings on the USDB parts of it. I'm supposed to go present, and with the motion moving forward, and with some better support slides in this, I believe that our presentation will be really solid. I'm looking forward to it. So thank you for your work, and thank you staff for making the meeting happen. And Jerry, thank you for your work there to keep us all kind of online and things working. And so it's kind of like getting out of school early a little bit, isn't it? When you a few minutes early. Thanks again for all you do, and you guys take care and be safe.
Thank you.
Meeting's concluded. Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Bye, guys.
Everybody.
Happy Mother's